Hello everyone, and welcome to my table, and welcome back to the channel. And today I will be reading some RPG horror stories. Feel free to listen while you do things like draw, clean, or whatever else you'd like to do, and thank you for watching, liking, and subscribing. Now let us move on to the story. We have a 3-part story today, from excellent patience on the RPG horror story subreddit. Try saying that 3 times fast. The DMPC proposed to me and it destroyed our table. Ooh boy. This is going to be a long story. It's one that slowly brewed over 2 years of D&D and came with a fair bit of real life drama. Honestly, the number of red flags I missed might make you think I'm colorblind. Just a heads up, I've changed a lot of details to avoid making this traceable, but the key parts are all there. I wanted to play D&D for years, but I always thought it would be too complicated or I would make a fool of myself. My best friend encouraged me to give it a shot when a spot opened up at their table. I thought my storytelling style might be a great fit, so I finally agreed. To say I was excited but nervous was an understatement. To give me time to prepare, my friend reserved the spot for me. Since I wouldn't have a session 0, they let me observe a regular session first, and I had a one-on-one interview with the DM to see if I'd fit in. The session was fun. As my friend had mentioned, the campaign dealt with serious topics with a focus on RP and backstory. Kinda like how I run my games. Then came the day I met the DM. He seemed fine, didn't notice anything weird at first, though he did mention not wanting anyone to bring drama to his table. He decided I was sane enough and asked what I prepared, so I introduced my character, a rogue assassin spy, a fallen noble obsessed with regaining her status but secretly soft-hearted because she took care of her 2 younger siblings after they were orphaned. The DM loved the idea, which gave me confidence, and I got really excited to play, but he warned me that the Assassin's Guild in his homebrew was a lot more realistic and expected its members, especially the women, to use all means necessary to complete a mission. I was fine with that as long as it was handled gracefully. He asked if I had any major boundaries for RP, and I said that I drew the line at any exploitation involving minors. Reasonable. He assured me that wouldn't be an issue. Why do I feel like that's going to be an issue? The campaign premise was pretty straightforward. Our party was hired by a powerful sorcerer to complete quests, though we weren't supposed to know the family's true motives. Each of our characters had some connection to the sorcerer or his family. To integrate my character, the DM asked for 3 things: her goals and dreams, a picture, and a creative backstory tied to the sorcerer. I uploaded a bunch of character art, including my cosplay that matched my vision for her, a femme fatale rogue. The DM's immediate response was, "God, I'd totally break my fast for her." Huh? The fuck does that mean? Followed by a JK. I checked in with my friend later, and they said the DM sometimes talked about his sorcerer in the first person, but that his character wasn't interested in romance. They assured me it was a joke. Okay. The Telegram group for the campaign seemed nice. The only 2 things to note: everybody else already knew each other, and the fact that I'm originally from a different country with a bit of an accent, and I'm mixed race. This becomes relevant in part 2. But as this good time of any to introduce the key players to part 1. Wizard, sponsored by Sorcerer's family as a child, now works for them, played by my best friend. Bard, College of Whisperers Bard, owes everything to Sorcerer's family, played by DM's sister. Druid, Moon Druid who lost everything and is indebted to the family, played by DM's best friend. And Paladin, sworn to serve the Sorcerer's family, another childhood friend of the DM. Then there was me, the rogue, a newcomer nobody trusted. My character was secretly assigned to spy on the party, and the Sorcerer's family presented herself as a rogue trying to turn over a new leaf. It was really fun. She had a little side missions that the other players didn't know about, and whenever someone questioned her, she'd flirt away out of trouble. This included charming Sorcerer, who didn't expect my character to be a flirt. She'd been trained to use charm as a tool, but slowly warming up to the group. After a few sessions, things took a turn. The guild started doubting my rogue's loyalty, saying that the intel she'd been providing was useless. Her siblings would pay the price if she didn't receive specific information from the sorcerer, by any means necessary. I didn't love this, so I talked to the DM, who assured me that nothing would actually happen to her siblings, and that it was just to motivate my character. So my rogue began focusing her charm on the sorcerer, hoping to gain access to his chambers to find what she needed. Sorcerer didn't resist much. He was smitten and started showering her with gifts. Meanwhile, Druid's players started teasing me above table, calling my character a gold digger repeatedly. Wizard assured me that it was all in good fun and only about the characters, not me. But something about it felt off. especially since the jokes were mostly directed at Rogue and Wizard. Then, 5 sessions later, the DM announced he wanted to step back from DMing and let other people take the reins to give himself a chance to play a PC. He asked Wizard to DM an ongoing campaign, not just a one-shot. Wizard was excited, but hadn't expected to take over something this complex. Sorcerer wanted to continue interacting with everyone as a player and explore all the relationships he had with the group. Wizard agreed, surprisingly chill with it. The DM and I began chatting more in private messages about our characters. He asked if Rogue was just after the intel or if there was something more. I clarified she didn't want to marry Sorcerer or have kids, but was charmed by his kindness and was focused on her mission. He seemed to understand, or so I thought. The next session, Sorcerer suddenly grew suspicious of Rogue and distanced himself, and the guild informed her, via private message, that they had taken her siblings and she had just 3 days to deliver the information. Panicked, Rogue tried to regain Sorcerer's trust. Wizard had just tried to run a straightforward mission, but kept getting pulled aside by Sorcerer, who was more focused on his character's relationships than the plot. Eventually, Sorcerer confronted Rogue privately, revealing he knew about her siblings and was willing to help if he was honest with him. She confessed everything, begging for his help. In response, Sorcerer offered her everything she ever wanted, but only if she'd marry him. Sorcerer was dangling her dreams right in front of her, but marriage wasn't what I envisioned for her arc. Still, my rogue said yes, because otherwise she'd risk losing her siblings. Druid's player exclaimed, "What the f***?" and left the session. Later I found out that Druid and Bard had a massive fallout with DM and left the campaign temporarily. And that was the beginning. Part 2 has new characters, old tensions, and things going weirder. Stay tuned for the rest. It's a wild ride. Alright, stepping in after the first post. Why was the Druid offended by the Sorcerer marrying the Rogue? I don't get that. Also, the DM said that no child would come to harm, and those 2 little siblings were considered children, so threatening them like that just seems kind of off. But that's just me. I could be wrong, there could have been context that's missing. I'm just unsure at this point, but still, forcing your character into a marriage, unless it's been previously talked about, is kind of weird. In the last part, I explained the lead up to the inciting incident. Now I'll cover the fallout and the marriage itself. Marriage on quotes. After the whole proposal fiasco, I asked the DM for a chat. I wanted to know why Sorcerer would marry my rogue, especially since she hadn't even fell in love with him, and it didn't make much sense for him to trust a spy. The DM assured me it was to protect her and the kids, and that he knew Rogue wasn't in love with him. He even added that in time, Rogue would come to love me. I wasn't thrilled with the idea, but as a newbie, I figured the DM knew what he was doing, especially since the campaign was engaging and well run. The fact that he said, Rogue will come to love me. I know he says he talks about the Sorcerer in first person, but still, that is kinda creepy. Just, you will come to love me. I agreed, but asked to build up the story. I wanted to see the fallout with the Assassin's Guild, exploring how far his siblings would cope with all this, and to see how my rogue balanced being both a party member and married to our sponsor. He assured me that we'd cover all of this during the next session as DM. He then said we'd be having to wait until he could convince his stepsister to get over it. When I asked what he meant, he explained that Bard and Druid were mad at him for proposing to the newbie, though he thought he could bring Bard back. He insisted it wasn't about me, and that it was an above-table issue he'd handle. So I decided to focus on my character's new goals and inner conflict. I wanted the rogue to feel realistic, so I planted her to struggle in readjusting to nobility and her fears of losing everything. Wizard suggested I keep a diary that deepened her character, and it ended up being a great idea that the DM also liked. Why do I feel like that's gonna bite her back in the ass later? Waiting for the next big session, Wizard ran a light-hearted story for Paladin, Sorcerer, and me for some character building. In it, Sorcerer announced that his marriage to his family and his coordinated rescue for the children. Paladin, meanwhile, wrestled with protecting someone he didn't even trust at first. It was great for building Rogue and Paladin's dynamic, and we even had some heartfelt moments. But at the end, Sorcerer returned to a solo mission and made it clear to Paladin that he was not to see the Rogue as anything other than the mistress of the house, and that she was only mine. Apparently, Sorcerer's protectiveness and jealousy was part of his character flaws, though it was strange how he'd never shown this before. But since the campaign had already dealt with complex topics, I went along with it, thinking it was part of his plan. Yes, I know. The bard came back, and the DM suggested DMing again. He immediately focused on her, setting up a mini-arc where she struggled with the sorcerer rejecting her advances. News to me, since there was no hint of this earlier. Bard threw a fit, cursed my character, and then rolled to seduce an NPC who was the sorcerer's cousin and looked just like him. The roll succeeded, and the DM, when Bard roleplayed it all the way out in graphic detail. What? In graphic detail. When asked, the DM said Bard had always wanted to do more romantic roleplay, and that he's always rejected the idea. It felt with flirting with his sister. Sweet home Alabama. However, he promised he was free to seduce now. After this, Bard never had an issue with the DM again, on or off the table. And what happened to our big marriage story arc? Well, the sorcerer pulled Rogue aside, had her sign a magically blood-binding contract, reassured her the kids were adopted to the family, and boom, they were married. He also informed me that the guild was taken care of, and that the kids were already in his mansion. The whole thing took less than the Bard's mini-arc, and definitely less time than the intimate scene. No roles, no real conflict, just nothing. It was anticlimactic to say the least. In the next session, Paladin cited scheduling conflicts, so Wizard was tasked with recruiting new players since they had all done a great job bringing me in. Wizard, ever so diligent, found some friends, and the DM interviewed them. It proved 3 new characters. Cleric, part of the secret cult run by the Sorcerer's family. Artificer, sponsored by Sorcerer's family and hopes to work for him. And Warlock, sold his soul to a demon connected to the cult and supposedly key to the family's future plans. Ooh, that's actually interesting. Artificer and Warlock were exes. Oh no! And Warlock and Cleric were in a flirtationship. They were all close friends now, which, spoiler alert, would matter in part 3. By the time they joined, Rogue was mistress of the household and expected to be a major figure to the new players. I was expected to guide the party, give them some respect, and join them on their first main mission. Sorcerer didn't like it, saying things like the mistress of this household shouldn't be doing things beneath her, but Rogue convinced her to let her go, arguing that she needed to see if they were trustworthy. He reluctantly agreed. The mission was easy, since it was tailored to the new character's level. They weren't leveled up to what your level was. But Rogue ended up doing most of the heavy lifting as the only martial character. She got hurt, but Cleric healed her. Still, Sorcerer used this excuse to forbid her from going on dangerous missions again. Rogue pushed back, but the tension between them was growing. I told the DM I wasn't happy with Rogue being barred from missions, as it defeated the purpose of D&D. He said it wasn't the intention, but now that Rogue was a married woman, she would have to balance that role too. He then mentioned he wanted to make a campaign more magic-based, and he didn't think my character fit because it was just a rogue. After a long argument, we compromised to give her tasks while the others did magic-related missions. What I didn't realize is that these tasks would involve either going on dates with Sorcerer, enduring constant reminders from NPCs that Rogue wasn't good enough, or repeatedly proving herself to Sorcerer's family members, every single session. Meanwhile, the others were off on actual adventures. I did my best to roll with it. I refined my character, learning new skills and stayed true to the Rogue, but I was basically a housewife. I told the DM this wasn't working and I felt like an NPC. Seeing how upset I was, he admitted he struggled to give Rogue meaningful tasks without conflicting with Sorcerer's family values, and that it would be out of character for Sorcerer to just let his wife just wander off. Frustrated, I asked why Rogue had to marry him if it wasn't a true part of the story. He replied that he just liked Rogue, and I asked if he meant the Sorcerer himself, and he said both. He added that he had a thing for girls with accents, and liked that Rogue was a mixed race like me. So I asked if he was attracted to me, and he swore up and down that he wasn't like that. He just thought Rogue was perfect for Sorcerer and wanted to be a powerful mistress, but needed to handle the other players' arcs. He promised to fix it, and unfortunately I trusted him again. By this time, Wizard was being absent from both our games and my life. Meanwhile, the DM started focusing more on Warlock and Artificer, who were getting closer to him, while Cleric was also starting to disappear, relevant for part 3. Whenever there was a disagreement, they just labeled me as dramatic, so I believed them and kept quiet. Finally, to make me happy, the DM decided to give me a project. He wanted to move our adventures to a new setting and asked me to design it. Everything, the economy, the social system, the religions, and as an amateur writer and a total fool, I happily accepted. In part 3, we'll dive into emotional breakdowns, betrayals, and the thrilling finale for the worst table ever. Okay, so, there's a lot of red flags in this section of the story. One, he made it clear that he's not putting a barrier between himself and Sorcerer. He's not putting a difference between the two characters because he's basically just putting himself in the position of the Sorcerer. You gotta kind of do that as a DM, put yourself as your characters, but you can't just be attracted to the character in that way because you might accidentally do some stuff that favors the character. Like, for example, in my D&D game, there's this character who's a robot man who basically is trying to understand emotions, who is, quote-unquote, in love with a tiefling woman. He's trying to figure it out. He's not sure what he's feeling yet. Personally, you could think the character is attractive, or you can think you like the character, but you can't be in love with the character, or you can't find that character attractive in the way that this DM is doing. Because you're giving favorites, you're pulling punches, you're basically just saying like, hey, I like your character, and that means you're going to get special privilege. In my D&D games, this tiefling character, I am refusing to give special privilege. They can go down or get hurt just like everybody else. And it's all about random chance. That's how the dice work. But this is just a big red flag to me. Basically, he's also saying, like, since the person is also mixed race, and the person also has an accent, and he likes that, it's kind of going between the boundary of DM and player relationships, and if they're not already in a relationship, it's kind of creepy. And the Sorcerer itself is a strange character, because apparently he wanted to marry the rogue, but he didn't trust her. It's strange. As well, the DM flirted with his sister, and I understand, like, there's a difference between RP and actual flirting. There's a different thing between that. But if you're doing RP scenes in quote-unquote graphic detail, that's something else. That is something else entirely. In my games, the closest thing we do is fade to black, because I don't think anyone's going to be comfortable with role-playing a scene like that. Especially in a public table. That is just creepy to do it with your sister. A fade to black is already a little bit uncomfortable if it's someone you're related to. But if it's graphic detail, that's something else. Overall, so far, the story is that the DM, I think, has a crush on the rogue. I think the DM is giving the rogue special privilege or is trying to limit their character because they want the character to be sorcerers. Only sorcerers. And I'm just like, ooh boy, this is some weird attachment issues going on, and it is creepy. I understand not seeing the red flags. Some people just don't see them. I'm autistic. I have that same issue. But I understand that when I see something like this, it basically is just like mitigating the character of Rogue. Because she had a certain backstory, she had a certain aspect of her character that she wanted to explore, and stuff like that. With the way the DM is doing it, he's basically sidestepping her entire story arc to get the thing he wants. That is a whole other can of worms. Now we'll move on to part 3.
Now the main problem area is up here. All of this going on up here is what's causing me the most physical discomfort.
In this part, you'll read the dramatic climax of this whole saga. Honestly, I don't even know how to prepare you for it except to say the drama was so intense it wrecked both the campaign and some real-life friendships. For warning, this part includes microaggressions, mention of child exploitation, and sexual harassment. When the DM invited me to build a new setting for our campaign, I was thrilled. He told me to stick to the general feel of the homebrew, but that I could add my own flavor. He also wanted it to have realistic themes and suggested looking at real-world civilizations for inspiration. I was excited about the creative challenge, but asked why he wanted to move the campaign to a new setting and how it would all go down. He confided that the current setting would be destroyed soon, so the party would have to relocate many people to a new place. The sorcerer's family knew about this impending disaster and was planning to move and seize the controller of a new city, using their cult and resources. The DM also suggested this would be a chance for my character to gain influence with the sorcerer's family and help shape the new place, while the sorcerer pursued his own goals. I thought this was a win-win situation, but I knew it would take a lot of work. We'd agreed I'd take the time and I needed to set things up and only join sessions when my character's input or guidance was necessary. We also planned for the DM to host a session to lay the groundwork for my character's temporary exit. So in the next session, most players were there, including Wizard and Cleric, who I barely saw before this. The DM set events in motion, giving closure to storylines and tied to current setting. We had some great scenes, including one where the rogue received the magical dagger from the sorcerer as a symbol of his love and promised to build an empire for her. They shared a romantic moment that led to a Fade to Black scene. The session ended with the start of a massive disaster, forcing a citywide evacuation. The sorcerer would lead everyone, including the party, to the Promised Land, the new setting. The roleplay was really good, and everyone was excited for what came next. After that, the DM let me know I could take my time since my character would be traveling separately with Sorcerer's family. When we reconnected, it would be after a time skip. I was worried the party might resent my character for abandoning them, but the DM reassured me that they'd understand because when they next saw Rogue, she'd be pregnant. Huh? I didn't love that he made this decision as soon as our characters had intimacy, but I did mind the idea of pregnancy, as I thought it could add some fresh dynamic to the story. Thus I focused on building the new setting, which was really exciting. Since the wizard was mostly absent, the DM guided me, keeping communication open, praising my ideas, encouraging me daily. It built a level of trust between us. Yes, I know. I spent months building the setting, incorporating features that each player can enjoy. I added a temple for the cleric and occult, and an underground entertainment area for the bard, and a commercial district for the artificer. I even asked each player for input to make it more engaging. Bard's advice to double check every detail because Druid would be returning and he would give me hell. Ooh. When I asked DM about it, he said he and the Druid had patched things up and he'd be returning as a co-DM since the wizard hadn't been around enough for him to enjoy being a PC. He told me that there was no plans for the Druid to rejoin as a player, but that it wouldn't hurt to add things he might like. I messaged the Druid who asked for his input, but he never replied, even though I knew he was active on social media. When I asked the DM about it, he assured me that the Druid didn't dislike me. He even joked that I was the best of the gold diggers in the DM's life. Lovely. So I braced myself for Druid's return and tried to attend sessions where my input was needed, but soon enough my workload exploded. The DM wanted my character to create a new spy/assassin skill to keep tabs on the city, and I was expected to roleplay every aspect of this in sessions without time to set up in the background. This was stressful, especially since Artificer had endless requests for her business dealings, which I was also expected to help with. The DM was letting the Artificer do almost anything she wanted with her character, and she kept pulling the spotlight, so often overshadowed the Wizard and Cleric, and the only reason the Warlock stayed relevant was because the Artificer was romancing him. As a surprise to no one, the DM and Artificer started hanging out a lot in real life, as does the Warlock. They'd even share updates in the group chat about their outings. At first, Cleric was happy for them and asked to join next time, but they ignored him every single time. Shortly after, Wizard reached out to apologize for their absence, explained that they had recently started dating Cleric and they wanted to keep things private until it was more serious. They thought that announcing the relationship to the group might actually ease some of the tension, especially since Artificer seemed to be getting territorial around Warlock, as she wanted to get back together with him. Surprisingly, the announcement did improve things, at least temporarily. Cleric became more active in sessions, and I was sure they both had meaningful involvement when we reached a new setting. But things quickly soured. Cleric, feeling encouraged by the positive responses, overstepped by showing up unannounced to one of the DM, Warlock, and Artificer's hangout. They casually shared a location in the group chat. From what I heard, Artificer berated Cleric, and Warlock, who was supposedly friends with both, just stood by. Rather than diffusing the situation, the DM let Artificer continue to undermine Cleric in-game, justifying it was something her character would do. I wasn't around for most of the drama, but Cleric and Wizard filled me in during a private get-together. When I brought up the DM, he said that he hadn't meant for things to spiral like this, claiming it was just a lingering tension between Cleric and Artificer that built up over the years. Wizard agreed that the issue was between Cleric and Artificer, were theirs to resolve, but pointed out that the DM had been fanning the flames. It honestly seemed to be like the DM just didn't like Cleric, even though he'd always deny it. Eventually, the damage was done. Wizard felt a little motivation to attend sessions anymore if they had to begin with, while of course Cleric just abandoned ship. With the Wizard and Cleric out, the DM brought the Druid back as a player and backup DM. Druid inspected every detail I added to the setting, nitpicking its realism, even though a lot of it was based on Artificer's requests, and no one stepped in to call him out on anything. Not to mention the Gold Digger jokes made a comeback. One day, while struggling to revise yet another part of the setting under Druid's scrutiny, I broke down. My partner found me mid-panic attack. He didn't know much about D&D, but he told me I shouldn't keep playing if it was causing this much stress. I tried to explain to him how much work I put into it and how hard it was just to walk away. He wasn't happy with me deciding to stay, but decided that I'd talk to the DM since we were supposedly close. So I did. Even though I was still in a bad headspace, I explained my frustrations, but the DM was defensive, saying I'd asked for this, and always complaining about not having enough to do. I panicked again, saying it wasn't fair that I had so much responsibilities while others didn't. He got angry, but then apologized, said he'd fix everything, and that I could take a break from my mental health. This is when the love bombing started. The DM checked in constantly, calling me one of the best players he'd ever had, suggesting we hang out as friends, and updating me on changes he'd make to make things easier for me. He even claimed that I'd talked to the Druid and Artificer to keep things in line, and I'm sad to say it got to me. I agreed to keep playing, but only in sessions that directly impacted my character's story. The next time I was invited, we had a session at Artificer's house. She let me in and told me to just go ahead and join the group at the table, and she'd grab something from her room. As I got closer, I could hear the DM talking openly about mixed girls in a way that felt objectifying. When the Warlock noticed me, they went quiet for a moment, saying they hadn't expected me to be so soon and brushed it off as locker room talk about their types. Artificer then backed them up, saying it was just harmless chatter. I told them I wasn't comfortable with conversations like that, especially since I identify as Ace. DM seemed surprised, asking questions about how things work between me and my partner, and how I could be so sure. I made it clear I didn't want to discuss it further, but it was never fully respected, that boundary. The Warlock and Artificer just laughed it off, when, without Wizard or Cleric around, I started wondering if I was just being sensitive. After all, it wasn't the first time people had been intrusive about my sexuality. One thing I can say in DM's favor is that he kept a word about not letting Artificer make any more changes. But the same thing couldn't be said about Druid. When he took over as DM, he was more distant, barely looking at me, keeping things short, and constantly questioning my character's choices. In one scene, he asked me to speak to a NPC my character had good relations with, who suddenly turned hostile. When I asked why, the NPC claimed he didn't want to work with a child exploitator. I was stunned and tried to assure him that that wasn't true, but he insisted it was my character's guild employed children with a by any means necessary approach. I felt sick. DM, who was playing at the PC at the time, said nothing. When I confronted DM about this, he said he didn't want to override Druid's choices. I pointed out that he intervened with Wizard as DM, but he brushed it off, saying Wizard was just a poor fit for the role. I kept pushing back against the child exploitator allegations, but DM argued that he wanted me for the world to be realistic, and that in Assassin's Guild, things like that happen. He claimed he'd put it in the background, since I refused to roleplay it directly. I was horrified and told him that my character wanted out of the guild entirely. He replied that it means she'd need to start a new system from scratch, something that he said was completely my responsibility. Seeing my reaction, he backtracked, offering to work with me on changing things and promising to keep Druid from bringing it up again. Not long after this ordeal, Druid refused to DM any further. When the DM and I began working to set things right, part of the solution played out in game. His character shifted from a player role to a guide for mine, letting my character take lead in planning and speaking. Around that time, I began noticing every time I said certain words, both Warlock and DM would ask me to repeat myself. I assumed it was because my pronunciation was too embarrassed to bring it up. But recently I caught Warlock and DM exchanging glances when they did this, and when the DM noticed me staring, he'd just say, "I just love how you pronounce those words," and Warlock smiled and smirking. You'd think I had told them off, but I felt even more embarrassed instead. Maybe it's just because I glanced at Druid, his expression seemed irritated, like he was annoyed with me. 2 sessions later, I woke up to a flood of texts, and an indecent picture from DM. Shit. He was talking about how he could make me happy and other things I didn't want to repeat. I was completely stunned and didn't react. The next day, he had deleted everything and texted, "Oops, wrong person." This finally snapped me out of it. I told him off and said he couldn't just send something like that without apologizing. He insisted he'd never do that with a taken woman, and he showed the screenshots of another conversation, claiming the messages were meant for someone else. He said he thought I hadn't seen the image, which is why he hadn't apologized. Not knowing how to respond, I asked my partner for advice. My partner was furious, saying that he hated this guy and thought the whole thing seemed deliberate. I also reached out to Wizard, who told me that they talked to DM to get at the bottom of things. DM showed Wizard the same proof he showed me, and the Wizard offered to mediate between us if I really wanted to keep playing. I know you're probably wondering why I considered staying after this. The truth, I didn't want to lose all the work I put into the campaign. Understandable. And somehow DM knew this. He called me saying he'd restart the entire world if we needed to regain my trust. Something in me just snapped. I called him and let him have it, screaming for hours. I felt better afterward, and he said he even deserved it. He kept promising to make whatever changes I needed if I stayed. Wizard, though, was not happy about how it was handled, especially since DM had apparently told both Druid and Bard about the incident. They both said that they didn't see what the big deal was about the messages. Obviously, they weren't meant for me, and the picture wasn't even that explicit. That made me feel maybe I overreacted, so I asked Wizard and my partner to drop it. I didn't want to keep revisiting it. They both respected my wishes. This is when the love bombing started again, but by now I was finally able to see through all of it. When he realized it wasn't working, he went public on Telegram, inviting everyone back, Cleric included, for an epic battle, and hitting a fresh start afterwards. He knew exactly how to get a reaction from me, and I took the bait. I asked if he was planning to kill our characters and erase my work. He claimed he wasn't, but he said he wanted to start fresh in my setting, suggesting we all make new characters to take down the cult since we clearly weren't the good guys. Then he said I was welcome to create a hero-type character if I wanted, as long as it was female, since he really enjoyed how I played female characters. I didn't respond to that. Right around this time, Druid clearly had enough and made a sarcastic remark asking if DM was planning to marry in real life as well. DM said no, unless it was something like immigration purposes, which I had never had issues with, and that he'd go and say he'd do it for any of his friends. This sparked a huge argument, and Druid ended up leaving the Telegram group and the campaign for good. DM insisted that Druid just couldn't handle that he was his only friend and that Druid should stay out of his business. After all of this drama, Warlock started scheduling conflicts for the reason for stepping away from the campaign. I still showed up to the session DM invited us to, along with Wizard, because we both wanted to see what was planned. However, we decided last minute I didn't bring my entire library of lore with me. DM punished me for reducing my hit points, and I distinctly remember Artificer laughing about it. I remember everything that was done. DM tried to ask if I was mad at him for the deduction, which I didn't respond to. However, I felt really bad about how much work I put into everything and started venting to my partner. They asked, okay, but when was the last time you had fun in this campaign? This prompted my second emotional breakdown. My partner was there to comfort me and talk me through the sunk cost fallacy and to give it time. And I did. Both Wizard and I decided to ghost the table and never look back. That was a year ago. I found out from the grapevine that Artificer and Warlock got back together. They're currently chill with Wizard and Cleric, who are also engaged. I also expected to be a bridesmaid. And for the rest, I haven't heard anything else. Oh, and the DM? He's dating Artificer's best friend, who is 10 years younger than him. But hey, that's a story within itself. I hope everyone had a great time. I'll admit, it was nice to vent here. Don't worry, I'm in a much better place with no DM PCs in sight. Okay. That was a lot. Ugh, God. See, I'm the kind of person who says, like, you should never send explicit images of yourself, because I believe they can just be leaked. But I also believe that they are just not good to have on your phone or anything else, because they could be so easily taken advantage of. So him sending that image itself already icked me out enough. But he sent it to them when they knew they were ace. They knew they were in a relationship. And they knew that they weren't interested. All of those. And it's just... that's disgusting. It was also very clear that the DM had a crush on the player, because they were very enamored with the way they said things. They were sending, like, oh, I could treat you better texts. They were love bombing them. It was very obvious. Even I'm dense as a pile of bricks inside of a black hole, and even I could tell that this guy was trying to pull something. I've had to deal with relationships at my tables before, and I've had to kick people out because they made people uncomfortable. I've had to deal with that before. It's never fun. It's never something that you want to deal with. But when the DM is doing it itself, it's a power dynamic, which you shouldn't be handling. Like, I'm in a D&D game with my girlfriend, who's amazing, by the way. And the reason why it works is because I don't give her special treatment in-game. I let her get hit just as much as anyone else. If she fails a check, she fails a check. If she gets hit to 0 hit points, she gets hit to 0 hit points. All of that. It's fair. But it's obvious that the sorcerer, or the DM in this case, was giving special treatment and was wanting to make sure that the player stayed, the rogue stayed. I think it's very obvious that he was wanting rogue. If it didn't start with the whole sorcerer-rogue relationship, it moved forward to, like, the repeating certain words because of her accent, mixed race, all of that, which was creepy in upon itself. Overall, this story, I'm glad it has a happy ending. Mostly. The DM is still out there. I don't know if they're still DMing games, but I'm glad that the rest of them got out. I assume except for the DM sister, because DM sister is DM sister. And Alabama seems to be a reoccurring theme. But I do think that this story has a lot of layers, and it also has a lot to do with manipulation tactics, and it's something you should look out for in your D&D games. Because there's always one saying that I remember, and it's always that no D&D is better than bad D&D. Also, no D&D is better than being manipulated. Well, that's the end of this episode of RPG Horror Stories. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to leave a like, favorite, and subscribe, and I will see you guys soon. See ya!